The wine glass froze halfway to my lips when my mother's laugh cut through the crowded room. We were at Uncle Jerry's house for the annual Brooks family reunion, surrounded by 40 relatives I barely saw anymore. My mother, Denise, stood near the fireplace with her signature smile, the one that made everyone lean in closer. "You all remember," she said, pausing for effect. "Alina was always the difficult one." The room rippled with awkward chuckles. Aunt Patricia nodded knowingly. Cousin Blake smirked into his beer. My chest tightened as eyes turned toward me, some pitying, others amused. I felt my husband Aaron's hand find mine under the table, but it wasn't the squeeze of support I needed. It was a warning. Don't make a scene. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I just sat there, feeling 34 years of carefully constructed lies settle over me like a suffocating blanket. My mother continued talking, embellishing some story about my teenage years, and everyone listened like she was sharing gospel truth. But something inside me shifted. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel shame. Felt clarity. This wasn't accidental. My mother had rehearsed this moment. The silence that followed my mother's declaration stretched uncomfortably long. Everyone expected me to respond, to defend myself, maybe even prove her point by getting emotional. Instead, I took a slow sip of wine and said nothing. My mother's smile flickered for just a second before she recovered, launching into another story. "Remember when Alina locked herself in her room for 3 days? Denise asked, gesturing dramatically. Wouldn't speak to anyone. We were worried sick. I remembered that weekend differently. I'd been 15, and I'd locked my door because my mother had thrown my diary across the room during an argument, scattering my private thoughts across the floor. I'd needed space to feel safe. But in my mother's version, I was unstable, dramatic, impossible to reach. Aaron's hand squeezed mine again, harder this time. I glanced at him and saw the tension in his jaw. He wasn't worried about me. He was worried about what I might say. That's when I recognized that squeeze. I'd felt it before, at his company party when I'd tried to correct one of my mother's stories. At Thanksgiving when I'd mentioned seeing a therapist. Watching my mother perform, I suddenly saw the pattern with painful clarity. Every story she told started with my reaction, never with what caused it. I was always crying, always overreacting, always storming off. But she never mentioned the insults that preceded the tears, the boundaries she'd trampled that led to the distance, the lies she'd told that forced me to correct her. The narrative was refined, practiced, and completely backward. She'd spent decades rewriting history, and everyone had accepted her version without question. Even me sometimes. Especially during the years when I'd wondered if maybe I really was too sensitive, too difficult, too much. But sitting there, watching her perform for an audience that ate up every word, something clicked. I remembered proof she'd forgotten existed. 3 years ago, during a particularly brutal argument, my mother had sent me a series of emails. Long, angry messages where she'd admitted things. Blamed herself for things she now credited to my difficult nature. Saved them. Not intentionally, just never deleted them. They were still sitting in my email archive, time-stamped and unedited. That night, back in the guest room Aaron and I were sharing, I couldn't sleep. 2 in the morning I grabbed my phone and opened my email. I scrolled back 3 years, searching for my mother's name. There they were. 7 emails, sent over the course of one weekend in March 2022. The first one started. "I know I pushed too hard at dinner. Your boundaries are reasonable, and I trampled them because I was embarrassed in front of Kyle's parents." The second. "You're right that I told your sister a different version. I was protecting my pride." The third, fourth, and fifth continued in the same vein. Apologies, admissions, promises to do better. By the 7th email, she'd claimed she was seeing a therapist to work on her control issues. None of that had happened. Within 2 weeks, she was back to her old patterns, and somehow I'd become the villain of every story again. I sat there in the dark, phone glowing, reading my mother's own words contradicting everything she'd said at the reunion. Then I noticed something that made my stomach drop. One of the emails was CC'd to Aaron. He'd been copied on her admission that she'd lied to my sister about me. The next morning, I waited until we were alone in the car before bringing it up. Aaron was driving us to breakfast at the diner downtown, and I kept my voice calm. "Do you remember those emails my mother sent 3 years ago?" Yes. The ones where she admitted she'd been controlling and dishonest. Aaron's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "Vaguely," he said, which was a lie. The email I'd seen had his reply underneath. "Thanks for being honest, Denise. I appreciate you acknowledging that. She's telling completely different stories now," I continued. "Last night she made it sound like I cut her off for no reason back then. But her own emails prove she knew why." Aaron was quiet for a long moment. Then he sighed. "That's just how your mom remembers things, Alina. Memory is complicated. People recall events differently over time." I stared at him. He wasn't confused. He wasn't trying to help. He was invested in my mother's version because it was easier than admitting he'd watched her manipulate me for years. It was easier than acknowledging he'd helped her do it. When we got home that evening, I checked our shared cloud storage folder, the one where we kept financial documents. Aaron never expected me to dig through old files. But I did. The folder was labeled, Family Financial Planning 2019. Inside were documents I'd never seen before. Paperwork from when my mother had offered to help manage my finances after I'd mentioned feeling overwhelmed during a difficult work period. I'd been grateful at the time. She'd set up a joint account, helped me organize my bills, and made everything feel more manageable. But looking at the documents now, I saw what I'd missed then. The account wasn't joint. It was in her name, with me listed as a secondary user. My access was restricted. I could see the balance, but I couldn't make transfers over $500 without her approval. My own money, and I'd needed my mother's permission to use it. I'd regained full control 2 years later after a massive argument, but I'd never understood why she'd fought so hard to keep managing it. Now I saw clearly. It wasn't help. It was control, disguised as maternal concern. At the bottom of the folder was another document that made my blood run cold. Aaron's signature right next to my mother's. He'd been present when she'd set up the restricted access. He'd witnessed the paperwork and never mentioned the control clause. At the reunion's second-day barbecue, my cousin Stephanie pulled me aside near the garden. She was older than me by 6 years, someone I'd always admired but rarely spoke to. Her voice was low, almost a whisper. "I always thought your mom exaggerated about you," she said, glancing toward the house where Denise was holding court with the aunts. "Even when we were kids, her stories didn't match what I saw. But I never said anything. I didn't want to be next." My throat tightened. "Next?" Stephanie nodded. "Your mom has a way of freezing people out if they question her. Remember Aunt Louise? They don't speak anymore because Louise suggested your mom was being too harsh about something you did. Your mom cut her off completely and told everyone Louise was toxic." I remembered. Aunt Louise had always been kind to me, but about 5 years ago, she'd stopped coming to family events. My mother had explained it as Louise having boundary issues and needing space from family drama. I'd never questioned it. "There's someone else who wants to talk to you," Stephanie added. "Uncle Jerry's wife, Nicole. She's noticed things too, but she's been afraid to say anything. I think she'd speak up now though, if she knew you were ready to hear it." That evening, I felt my mother's eyes on me constantly. She'd noticed my silence, my distance, and it was making her nervous. By the time dessert was served, she'd cornered me in the kitchen with a concerned expression that would have fooled anyone who didn't know better. "You've been so quiet, sweetheart," Denise said, touching my arm. "Are you feeling all right? You seem emotionally fragile lately." There it was. The setup. If I said I was fine, I was lying. If I admitted to being upset, I was proving her point about being fragile. It was a trap she'd perfected over decades. "I'm fine, Mom," I said evenly. "Just listening." Her eyes narrowed slightly, but she smiled. "Well, if you need to talk, I'm here. I worry about you sometimes. Aaron mentioned you've seemed stressed." Another trap. She was planting seeds, telling relatives I was struggling so that any pushback from me would look like instability. I could already hear how she'd frame it later. Poor Alina was going through something at the reunion. She wasn't herself. The next morning, Erin told me Denise wanted to have a family meeting before everyone left. Just the core family, she'd said. Me, Erin, my younger sister Bridget, and my parents. To clear the air. The meeting happened in my parents' living room on Sunday afternoon. My father, Kenneth, sat quietly in his recliner as always, letting Denise orchestrate everything. Bridget perched on the couch looking uncomfortable. Erin sat next to me, and my mother positioned herself in the center of the room like a therapist about to lead a session. I think we need to talk about the tension I've been feeling, Denise began, her voice soft and concerned. Alina, I love you so much, and it hurts me when I sense distance between us. I know I'm not perfect, but everything I've ever done has come from a place of love. She was good. Her eyes actually glistened with tears. Bridget immediately looked at me like I was the problem. I just want us to heal, my mother continued. I want to understand what I did wrong so I can fix it. I stayed quiet, which seemed to unnerve her. She'd expected me to either break down or get defensive. Instead, I just watched her perform. Erin has mentioned you've been struggling, Denise added, glancing at my husband. Tell her what you told me, Erin. Erin shifted uncomfortably. I just said you seemed stressed. That's all. You said she's been different, my mother corrected. More withdrawn. I think Alina's been under a lot of pressure, and maybe she's misremembering some things from her childhood. Trauma can do that. My phone was recording everything in my pocket. The meeting continued for another 30 minutes, with my mother carefully reframing every conflict we'd ever had. In her version, I'd always overreacted to normal parenting. My boundaries were actually walls I'd built because of my own insecurities. My distance was emotional instability, not self-protection. Erin backed her up constantly. I was there for most of these situations, he said. I think Denise's perspective is fair. But then something strange happened. My mother brought up an argument from 2 years ago, claiming I'd stormed out of Thanksgiving dinner without explanation. Erin nodded immediately. That's right, he said. You left early and wouldn't answer your phone. But my mother's face flickered with something like panic. Well, not exactly early, she corrected quickly. It was after dinner. Right, Erin stammered. After dinner. That's what I meant. But he'd said I left early, and my mother had contradicted him before thinking. They were both lying, but their stories didn't match. I'd actually stayed through dessert that day and left at a normal time. But in their revised history, I'd fled, proving my instability. They just couldn't agree on the details. I pulled out my phone, pretending to check a message, and stopped the recording. Then I sent a single text to Stephanie. It's time. Over the next 2 days, Stephanie and Nicole reached out to 3 other relatives. People who'd witnessed my mother's behavior over the years but stayed quiet out of fear or family loyalty. One by one they started sending me messages. Uncle Jerry confirmed that my mother had privately admitted to him that she exaggerated Alina's issues for discipline purposes when I was a teenager. Nicole, his wife, sent me a screenshot from 4 years ago where my mother had texted her. I know I'm hard on Alina, but she needs it. She'd be lost without someone keeping her in line. Even Bridget, my younger sister, finally cracked. She called me Tuesday night crying. I heard what Mom said at the reunion, she whispered. And I've been thinking about it. She does the same thing to me, just differently. She tells me I'm too soft, too trusting. She's always rewriting what actually happened. The difficult child narrative was collapsing, and I hadn't said a single word yet. I just stayed quiet long enough for other people to feel safe stepping forward. On Wednesday afternoon, my mother heard about the conversations. Stephanie told me later that Denise had called her, furious, demanding to know what lies were being spread. Thursday evening, my mother showed up at my house unannounced. Erin was at work, so it was just the 2 of us. The moment I opened the door, I knew the mask was coming off. How dare you, Denise hissed, pushing past me into the hallway. How dare you turn my family against me? After everything I've done for you. I closed the door calmly and pulled out my phone, starting a new recording. What are you talking about, Mom? Don't play innocent, she snapped. Stephanie told me you've been collecting stories, twisting things I said, making me look like some kind of monster. You've always done this, Alina. You've always needed to be the victim. I haven't told anyone anything, I said truthfully. People are just starting to talk. Because you manipulated them. Her voice was rising, losing control. You've poisoned them against me. This is exactly the kind of thing you do. This is why I had to stay on top of you your whole life. Because you can't be trusted. There it was. The quiet part said out loud. I wasn't difficult because of who I was. I was labeled difficult because I dared to resist her control. I'm going to tell everyone the truth, Denise said, her voice shaking with rage. I'm going to make sure they know what you really are. My mother's version of the truth arrived Saturday morning in a family group text. It was a long message claiming I'd been spreading lies about her, that I'd always struggled with reality, that she was heartbroken by my betrayal. She painted herself as a loving mother attacked by an unstable daughter. But she'd made a critical error. In her message, she referenced specific events, dates, and conversations. Things she claimed I'd distorted. I pulled up my evidence folder, the one I'd been quietly building all week. Every email, every screenshot, every recording, every witness statement. I'd organized it all by date, creating a timeline that showed exactly what had actually happened. Her version said I'd cut her off in March 2022 without explanation. My evidence showed her emails admitting she'd trampled my boundaries and lied to my sister. Her version said I'd been emotionally unstable at Thanksgiving 2023. My evidence showed I'd stayed through dessert and left at 8:30, with my father's text thanking me for coming. Her version said I'd always been difficult. My evidence showed a pattern of her rewriting reality and punishing me for noticing. I didn't send it to the family group chat. Not yet. I needed to choose the moment carefully. That evening I sat Aaron down at our kitchen table. The house was quiet, and I'd made sure we had privacy. I showed him everything. The emails, the recordings, timeline, the witness statements. I'm giving you one chance, I said quietly. We can go to the family together and clear this up honestly. Or I can do it alone. Aaron stared at the evidence for a long time. I watched his face cycle through shock, denial, and finally something that looked like fear. He understood what this meant. If the truth came out, his complicity would be exposed too. Alina, he said finally. If you do this, you'll tear the family apart. The family is already torn apart, I replied. It's just been hidden under lies. People will blame you, he insisted. They'll say you should have kept this private. They'll say you're vindictive. Probably, I agreed. But at least they'll be blaming me for something I actually did. Aaron shook his head. I can't be part of this. I won't stand with you against your mother. And there it was. The final answer I'd been waiting for. My husband would rather protect my abuser than support me. The marriage wasn't ending because of what I was about to do. It had ended years ago, the moment he chose to echo her lies instead of seeing my truth. 2 weeks later, my parents announced they were hosting a family dinner at their house. My mother had carefully rebuilt her narrative, telling everyone that I'd been going through a mental health crisis and she was concerned for my well-being. She'd positioned herself as the worried mother reaching out to her troubled daughter. I knew this dinner was her attempt to regain control of the story. She'd invited not just family but family friends too. People from church, neighbors, even my father's business associates. She was building an audience. Aaron told me we should skip it, that going would just make things worse. But I'd already RSVP'd yes. My mother had texted me personally, writing, "Please come, sweetheart. Let's put this all behind us." I spent those 2 weeks preparing. Not emotionally, though I'd done that work too. I prepared strategically. I organized my evidence into a clear, undeniable presentation. I rehearsed what I'd say, keeping it calm and factual. I made backup copies of everything and sent them to Stephanie for safekeeping. The night of the dinner, I dressed carefully. Nothing too formal, nothing too casual. I wanted to look stable, composed, unremarkable. I arrived alone. Aaron had refused to come, claiming a work emergency. The dinner table was crowded with 23 people. My mother had outdone herself, preparing enough food for a small wedding. She'd positioned me next to her, probably so she could control my reactions. Everyone was chatting, drinking wine, enjoying the performance of family harmony. After the meal, my mother stood up with her wine glass, calling for everyone's attention. Here it comes, I thought. The big forgiveness speech. I want to thank everyone for coming, Denise began, her voice warm and maternal. Family is everything to me, and I'm so grateful that we can all gather together, even during difficult times. Some of you know that Alina and I have had our challenges lately. But I believe in forgiveness. I believe in loving our children even when they struggle, even when they make mistakes. The room murmured appreciatively. I could see the setup happening in real time. She was about to forgive me publicly for things I hadn't done, cementing herself as the gracious mother and me as the difficult child who'd finally been welcomed back. So tonight, my mother continued, I want to say that no matter what, I love my daughter and I always will. Even when she's going through something, even when she can't see clearly, I'll be here. I stood up. The room went quiet. Thank you, Mom, I said calmly. I appreciate that. And since we're talking about seeing clearly, I'd like to share something. I pulled out my phone and opened my email app. My mother's face flickered with confusion, then alarm. 3 years ago, I began. You sent me a series of emails. I'm going to read from one of them now. I started reading, my voice steady. I know I pushed too hard at dinner. Your boundaries are reasonable, and I trampled them because I was embarrassed in front of Kyle's parents. The room had gone completely silent. I looked up. You wrote that, Mom. On March 14, 2022. You admitted you'd violated my boundaries and lied about it. I don't remember that, my mother said quickly. That's out of context. I have the full email thread, I replied. Would you like me to read all 7 messages? The ones where you admitted to controlling me, lying to Bridget about me, and promising to see a therapist you never actually saw. My mother opened her mouth, then closed it. She was trying to find a way to interrupt, to redirect, but I'd planned for this. Actually, I continued, I have recordings too. Would you like to hear the family meeting from 2 weeks ago? I played 30 seconds of audio from the meeting. My mother's voice, clear and unmistakable, saying, I think Alina's been under a lot of pressure, and maybe she's misremembering some things from her childhood. Trauma can do that. Then Aaron's voice. I was there for most of these situations. I think Denise's perspective is fair. I stopped the playback. For the record, Aaron wasn't there for most of my childhood. He met me when I was 23. But he backed up every story Mom told, even the ones he couldn't have witnessed. I pulled up another file. And here's a text from Aaron to my mother from last month. Thanks for the heads up about Alina's mood. I'll keep an eye on her. I looked at the stunned faces around the table. They were monitoring me, discussing me behind my back, and building a narrative that I was unstable. I turned to my mother. You didn't just lie, Mom. You orchestrated a campaign to make everyone believe I was the problem. And it worked for 34 years. My mother's face had gone pale. She was looking around the room for support, but people were staring at her with growing understanding. The mask was cracking. You're twisting this, Denise said, her voice rising. You're making me look like some villain. I'm your mother. I gave you everything. You gave me control disguised as help, I said quietly. And when I tried to take my own life back, you punished me for it. I pulled up the financial documents. In 2019, you offered to help manage my money. I was grateful. I thought you were being supportive. But look at this account structure. My own money with restricted access. I couldn't make transfers over $500 without your approval. I looked at Aaron, who'd gone completely silent. And my husband signed off on it. He witnessed the paperwork and never told me what I was agreeing to. I was trying to help, my mother said desperately. You were overwhelmed. I was overwhelmed, I agreed. But you didn't help me manage stress. You took control while I was vulnerable, and you fought me for 2 years when I wanted it back. Uncle Jerry spoke up from the end of the table. Denise, you told me you exaggerated Alina's problems. You said it was for discipline. My mother whirled on him. That's not what I meant. You misunderstood. I have the text, Jerry said quietly. You wrote, I know I'm hard on Alina, but she needs it. She'd be lost without someone keeping her in line. Nicole pulled out her phone. I have messages too. My mother's control shattered completely. You're all ganging up on me, she shouted, her voice cracking. After everything I've done for this family, this is how you repay me. By believing her lies. They're not lies, Mom, I said. They're your own words, time-stamped and saved. You manipulated all of them, Denise snapped, pointing at Jerry and Nicole. You've always been good at playing the victim. That's your real talent, Alina. Making everyone feel sorry for poor misunderstood you. The room recoiled. This was the person I'd known in private, the one who came out during arguments behind closed doors. But she'd never shown this face publicly before. She'd lost control of the performance. I sacrificed everything for you, my mother continued, tears streaming down her face. I gave up my career, my time, my energy. And you repay me by trying to destroy me in front of everyone I love. You sacrificed nothing, I said, and my voice finally carried the weight of 3 decades of silenced truth. You controlled everything. And when I tried to exist outside your control, you made me the villain. Bridget stood up, her voice shaking. She's right, Mom. You do it to me too. Just in different ways. My mother looked at my sister with pure betrayal. Not you too. What happened next was something I hadn't expected. One by one, people started speaking up. Not attacking my mother, but sharing their own observations, their own experiences. Moments they'd dismissed or explained away. Stephanie mentioned being frozen out after questioning my mother's version of events. Nicole talked about the pressure to stay silent about things she'd witnessed. Even my father, silent for so many years, finally spoke. Denise, he said quietly, I think we need to acknowledge that maybe Alina's perspective has some truth to it. My mother looked around the room, realizing she'd lost something she couldn't get back. Not their presence, not their polite smiles, but their unquestioning belief in her narrative. The story she'd spent decades writing was being rewritten in real time. I won't stay here and be attacked, Denise said, standing up. She looked at me with pure hatred. You've destroyed this family, Alina. I hope you're proud of yourself. I didn't destroy anything, I replied. I just stopped protecting the lie. My mother walked out of her own dinner party, and my father followed her after a moment. The room sat in heavy silence until Jerry cleared his throat. I think, he said carefully, we all owe Alina an apology for not seeing this sooner. After the dinner, I drove home in silence. No tears, no triumph, just exhaustion. I'd spent 34 years carrying the weight of being the difficult child, and I'd finally set it down. But the space it left felt strange and raw. Aaron was waiting at the house when I arrived. He'd obviously heard what happened, probably from my mother. He stood in the living room, arms crossed, and his first words were, "Was it worth it?" "Yes," I said simply. "You humiliated her," Aaron said. "You humiliated me. Everyone's going to see me as the husband who didn't protect his wife." "You didn't protect me," I corrected. "That's what they'll see." Aaron's face hardened. "I thought we were a team, Alina. But you just proved that you're exactly what your mother said you are. Difficult, ungrateful, vindictive." I looked at the man I'd been married to for 8 years and felt nothing but clarity. "You never saw me," I said quietly. "You saw who my mother told you I was, and you chose to believe her because it was easier." "I want a divorce," Aaron said. "Good," I replied. So do I. He left that night, and I didn't try to stop him. I sat in our living room, now just my living room, and felt something I hadn't felt in years. The divorce was surprisingly simple. Aaron wanted it done quickly and quietly, probably to minimize the gossip. I agreed, not because I was being accommodating, but because I had nothing left to say to him. Our lawyers handled everything, and within 4 months, the marriage was legally over. Aaron tried to reach out a few times in those months. Texts asking if we could talk, calls I didn't answer, one email suggesting marriage counseling. But I remembered his silence during all the years when I'd needed him. I remembered how he'd squeezed my hand as a warning, not a comfort. I remembered his voice backing up my mother's lies. So I gave him the same silence he'd once given me. No explanation, no argument, no chance for him to rewrite our history the way my mother had tried to rewrite mine. His silence had spoken volumes. Mine would too. The last time I saw him was at the final divorce hearing. He looked tired, smaller somehow. I didn't understand what I was doing, he said in the courthouse hallway. If I could go back. You can't, I interrupted gently. And I wouldn't want you to. This needed to happen. I walked away from him, and it felt like closing a door I should have closed years ago. 3 weeks after the divorce was finalized, my mother sent me a message. It was long, carefully written, and arrived at 2 in the morning. I read it twice, analyzing every sentence the way I'd learned to analyze her communications. Dear Alina, it began. I've spent a lot of time thinking about what happened at the dinner. I realize now that I may have been too controlling at times. I was trying to protect you, but I understand if you felt smothered. I never meant to hurt you. You're my daughter and I love you. I hope we can find a way to move forward together. Family is too important to throw away over misunderstandings. Please call me when you're ready to talk. Love, Mom. It was perfectly crafted. Vague enough to avoid real accountability. Just enough admission to seem sincere, and centered entirely on her feelings, her intentions, her pain. She wanted me to call her to let her explain, to give her a chance to regain control of the narrative. I read it one more time, then closed the message without responding. For 34 years I'd been trained to manage her emotions, to smooth over conflicts, to accept partial apologies and move on. Not anymore. I opened a new message and wrote a single sentence. The message I sent was simple. I was never difficult. I was telling the truth. Then I blocked her number, her email, and all her social media accounts. I blocked Aaron's family, the relatives who'd sent concerned messages suggesting I'd overreacted, and anyone who tried to pull me back into the old story. I didn't do it with anger. I did it with clarity. These people had a choice, and they'd chosen to protect a comfortable lie instead of an uncomfortable truth. I couldn't control what they believed. I could only control what I accepted. In the months that followed, life became quieter but fuller. Stephanie and I grew closer. Nicole and Jerry included me in smaller family gatherings where my parents weren't invited. Bridget started therapy and called me regularly, working through her own realization about our mother's patterns. I started dating again slowly. I went back to school for the degree I'd abandoned years ago when my mother convinced me I wasn't smart enough. I moved into a smaller apartment that felt more like home than any house I'd shared with Aaron. And every time I caught myself shrinking, apologizing for existing, or second-guessing my own reality, I remembered that reunion. I remembered my mother's performance and my decision to finally stop participating in my own erasure. I was never difficult. I was observant. I was honest. And I refused to stay small forever.